Hello and welcome to Taiwan Today. I'm Natalie So. I'm very honored to have with me a renowned expert on Taiwan, the director of the Future Asia Project at the International Assessment and Strategy Center in Washington. He's been invited here by the Taiwan think tank, Mr. John Tkacik. John, it's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really a privilege to be here.
Yeah, and we just finished midterm elections, very major elections, and the DPP had a major defeat. In your opinion, what does this reflect about public sentiment?
Well, I think the Taiwan voter was looking primarily at domestic issues. It seems to me that this was not a thing that the American government or the American policymakers are going to take too personally. I don't know exactly what the dynamics were for the domestic policy, whether it was the veterans who were complaining about their pensions, or shopkeepers who were complaining about the way that the Tsai administration was handling urban development. But I think as far as the smaller issues were concerned, and these were, it reflected two things. One is that there's still a considerable level of traditional outlook toward morality and family life. There's still a considerable traditional outlook toward Taiwan's energy production, and there's still a traditional outlook toward protection of Taiwan's agricultural and farming sectors. And a lot of this sort of resonated in itself to generate, I think, a message to the new government on domestic issues. I think there was also a lot of Chinese involvement in, I don't want to say manufacturing fake news. A lot of it was fake news, there's no question. But the Chinese are very active in using social organizations, social internet networks and communication networks, and exploiting just minor wedge issues in Taiwan society to generate a big echo chamber of dissent. Another phenomenon that seemed to be prevalent was that there seemed to be a lot of either fake news or exaggerated news about the way the Tsai government was dealing with broader issues of Taiwan's identity, to the point that a lot of people, a lot of the electorate that you would expect would come out and support the Green camp, basically just stayed at home and sat on its hands. And I heard a couple of people comment the other day in a humorous way that the day after the election, several 100,000 DPP voters got up in the morning and read the newspapers and were horribly, alarmed and angered because they didn't go out and vote.
Oh, really? It's too late now.
So, well, that was it. So it's sort of hard to put this kind of an election in a broader context beyond Taiwan without sort of factoring all these things in.
So, China has been coming down hard on President Tsai. I mean, they're using many strategies. For example, they took a lot of diplomatic allies. There's increased military activity. There's pressure on international businesses to list Taiwan as a part of China. So do you think that this kind of tension in cross-strait relations is working, for China's benefit? That people are now dissatisfied with how it might affect Taiwan economically or internationally, and do you think China is getting their way? Do you think their strategies are working?
Well, it remains to be seen. I think as far as President Tsai Ing-wen is concerned, she's doing exactly what she promised she would do, which is to hold a steady course with China. And what she promised her American and her Japanese and her Asian and her European partners, which is she's going to hold a moderate course. And I think she's fulfilled that. I think everybody, all global leaders specifically in the democratic, in the community of democracies, is very not only happy with President Tsai Ing-wen, but positively impressed with her abilities. I think that China is pushing her in a direction that neither she nor the international community of democracies wants her to go in, which is to basically sell out to China and basically say China is going to be part of or Taiwan is going to be part of the Chinese camp. We see that the diplomatic shouduan, what do you call it? The diplomatic schemes, when China tried to pull away Taiwan's diplomatic support, especially in Central America, it had a very strong backlash, not here, but in Washington.
Right. It was the first time they had an act that actually passed in Congress.
It's the first time that the President of the United States has complained about it. It's the first time that the Secretary of State of the United States had recalled his ambassadors from the countries that broke ties with Taiwan to discuss, where we go in the future with these countries that simply do not listen to our concerns.
So why is the U.S. so concerned this time? Is it because it's in their backyard, or is there a greater reason?
There are two or three reasons, but I think the one reason, of course, is China is going into America's backyard and trying to buy influence in America's strategic territory, if you will, sphere of influence, if you will. But the second reason is that I think for the first time, Washington is afraid that if China begins to kick out all of the diplomatic legs from Taiwan's diplomatic table, at the very end, there's no alternative for Taiwan but to declare that they are not part of China, because all of these countries recognize the Taipei government as the sole legal government of China.
So you think that if we lost all of our allies, that would mean that a likelihood of war would be even more?
Well, I think that's what...
Or that's what the U.S. is afraid of.
This is what the U.S. is afraid of. They're afraid that when you start messing with the status quo to that level, that the instabilities that bubble up and the pressures that are put on the Zhonghua Minguo government in Taiwan become overwhelming. This is going to get abstruse, but there are 4 criteria for statehood in international law, and these are criteria that the United States recognizes. And most countries of the world adopt them. And one is, it has to have a independent country has to have a defined territory, a defined population, a government that administers that population with sovereign authority. And the last thing is that it has the capacity to engage in foreign relations. Oh. Now, Taiwan fulfills all 4 of those criteria. The State Department in 1986 came up with a 5th criterion, which is a country has to declare that it's a country.
Oh.
So not only does it have to have a defined territory, population, a government, and a capacity to deal in foreign relations, but it also has to say we are a government. And insofar as Taiwan has not declared that they are the government of Taiwan, but rather the government of this much bigger entity of China, the United States withholds its judgment on Taiwan's international status as an independent state. So the United States is looking at, once you start removing all of these countries that recognize Taiwan as the government of all China, toward the end of that road, Taiwan has no choice but to say, well, we're the government of Taiwan. We had constitutional revisions in the 1990s. We've had constitutional and electoral revisions in the 2000s. We've had an entirely new structure of zhengdangxing, you know, what you call a structure of legitimacy. And since nobody else recognizes us as the government of all China, we hereby declare that we're the government of Taiwan instead.
So is the U.S., you know, they passed this Taipei Act for that reason, right? Is that working? Is it working on the allies that still recognize Taiwan? Are they more wary now of moving to China?
I think, oddly enough, I think they are. I'm not at liberty to discuss which countries we're talking about, but I think there's several key countries still in Latin America and the Caribbean that we're counting on. But I think, you know, without giving away too much, I think what we're most concerned about is Taiwan's diplomatic representation in the Western Pacific, in the Pacific Islands, in Tuvalu, in Palau, and the Marshall Islands. And the Pacific Island countries are moving toward China, and that this, at bottom, is a geopolitical, I don't want to say threat, but it's a geopolitical challenge to not just the U.S., but to Japan and Australia and New Zealand. I think finally Australia and New Zealand are coming to realize that this is a problem in their own backyard. But we have other,
So the U.S. is actually coming to Taiwan's hand, you know, diplomatically. They're making a difference. What about militarily? You know, China is growing in its military, you know, strength, and their increased military activity around Taiwan. How much would the U.S. support Taiwan if China attacked? Under what conditions would the U.S. be there for Taiwan?
I mean, I don't speak for the government, of course, or I have a feeling that the U.S. is fully committed to Taiwan, and just about whatever happens. I mean, I can't imagine a scenario where Taiwan really provokes China into an attack. The only scenario I can imagine is that China creates a jieko, a pretext, a pretext for attacking, because they feel confident. Either they feel confident that Taiwan will collapse fairly quickly, or they feel confident that the United States is not going to get involved, or Japan, or anybody else, or both. And my feeling is that this is, like I say, this is my gut feeling now, that throughout the last 70 years of U.S. foreign policy, that whenever we've been faced with a situation like this, where a country under our personal, the United States' personal security relationship is attacked, even if we don't feel like we should be protecting those countries, we always get involved. We saw this in Korea in 1950, where the United States had no intention of defending Korea, and yet when the North Koreans attacked South Korea, the United States was in there with both feet very quickly. And not only that, in 1950, when the North Koreans attacked South Korea, the United States had no intention of defending Taiwan. And all of a sudden, literally within 2 days, President Truman ordered the Pacific Fleet, the 7th Fleet, into the Taiwan Strait to do two things. One is, well, primarily to defend Taiwan against China. We've seen it several times after that, but most recently in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait, there was a big debate in the United States about whether the United States really belonged in that. This was not our battle. This was Iraq and Kuwait fighting, and why did we have to get involved? But literally, the day after not even the day after, the day of the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the President of the United States said this will not stand, and built up a coalition to push Iraq out. I think we've seen that kind of determination where the United States had no intention, of getting involved in a war, but when it was presented to us, we had no qualms but to get involved. And I think Taiwan is going to be in that situation. The problem, I think now, okay, I was going to go on into ancient history, but we can't. We don't have time.
Okay, we'll talk more in our next episode.
Good.
I've been honored to be speaking with John Tkacik. He's the director of the Future Asia Project at the International Assessment and Strategy Center in Washington, D.C. He's a renowned expert on Taiwan and China. We'll be talking to him more about U.S., China, and Taiwan relations in our next episode of Taiwan Today. I'm Natalie So. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.